I would like to use this opportunity to really commend you for an excellent moderation that you have done. I'd like to thank His Excellency, the Commissioner Muchanga, for working with us to be able to have this session. I'd like to also thank very much the Minister of Finance of Zambia for ably representing His Excellency, President Hichilema of Zambia with your remarks. Well, thank you very much to you, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, for your very insightful comments, suggestions, and recommendations on how to have faster growth in Africa, and also what you said in terms of the volume of resources that are needed and the critical nature of actually upscaling the financing through the African Development Bank. Let me thank Minister Zainab Ahmed from Nigeria for sharing her experiences from Nigeria about what needs to be done in terms of also improving access of our countries to capital markets in these very, very tough times. And thank you to my Vice President Beth Dunford, Vice President Akinwumi, but also to Professor Oyelaro and others that have contributed so significantly. Just to close with some of my thoughts on this. First is, I think I want to pick up on where Professor Jeffrey Sachs just left off. We must have a resolution of the debt issues in Africa. There are three fundamental areas there. We used to have, of course, we had the debt service suspension initiative. I think given the tightening of the fiscal space for our countries, there's certainly need for us to make sure that that actually gets further extended to give breathing room. Of course, we have from the Minister of Finance of Zambia about the G20 Common Framework. That's actually a great framework, because in getting the creditors all together to look at what needs to be done, both on the public side, but also on the private side. But we need to make faster progress on that. We have this for Ethiopia, we have it for Zambia, we have it for Chad. But as we heard from the Minister of Zambia, we need faster progress on that. We all need to work collectively on that. Of course, the critical issue we have to make sure we do is to make sure that low-income countries have access to much needed low-cost financing for their development. And we must also realize that if you take the Sahel, for example, take Niger, take Mali, take Chad, take Burkina Faso, many of these countries are spending so much of their resources on one issue that we have not talked about today, which is on security. And we just have to make sure that the development financing is going downwards, but expenditure on security continues to go up. So all the things that we are talking about today, we cannot achieve them unless we do a fundamental rethinking of the development paradigm itself. We have to now realize that insecurity or security, it's not an exogenous factor in the development process. Security is an endogenous factor. And therefore, we must actively link together security with investment, with growth and development, and make sure that we come up with innovative tools to support many of these fiscally challenged countries that are facing insecurity to be able to get additional financing. We are leading a lot of work on this with security index investment bonds, to working together with the African Union Commission. And this is very important for us to bear in mind. I also think that we need to, I need to say that the progress that we are making at the African Development Bank in terms of taking the African Development Fund, which is the bank's facility for low-income countries to the market, it's a very, very significant one, because with that, we will be able to raise an additional $33 billion for these low-income countries. So again, making sure that we use the equity we have to leverage the capital markets will be a key part of leveraging more resources for these low-income countries. There's no doubt that we must also mobilize domestic resources. Yes, we have had that. We have to mobilize savings. We need to improve in tax collection and so on. But let's not forget, it's not just about collecting more taxes. It's about how the taxes are used. And I've always said that Africa has perhaps one of the highest implicit tax rates in the world, in the sense that we collect taxes, but governments do not do what they should do in most cases, to transfer most of this to the government, to the citizens. So the citizens have to provide electricity, they have to provide water, they have to provide their own insurance. They have to also make sure that they can send their kids to school. And so we have to make sure that expenditures, taxes that are collected are used effectively for the citizens. So there has to be issue of tax accountability, even as we talk about mobilizing more domestic resources. I want to also say I agree with what has been said about the issue of debt. But public financial management, we must continue to keep our eyes on that. Yes, we need more space for that. But I think I just want to add that we need also to look at the important debt. We can't develop only just on debt, though. We have to make sure that we open greater space for the private sector, especially investment, which you all talked about. We ought to also develop a lot of local capital markets and focus more as well on mobilizing local currency financing to deal with some of the mismatch in terms of a currency mismatch that you have. You have projects and infrastructure that are being done in local currency in terms of revenue, but also the loans you're taking are actually in foreign currency. And as Professor Rama said, as depreciation happens and the cost of financing those things go up. So we do need to prioritize and develop our local capital markets to mobilize a lot more local currency for financing infrastructure and other things. We've heard about the importance of illicit capital flows. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of governance. Let's make sure that we have better governance, cut back on illicit capital flows, and make sure that we put our monies in our continent, not outside the continent. The issue that I also want to say as we look at the importance of private investment, which Minister Ahmed just said, is the need for us to do two things. We have to de-risk, then we have to develop bankable projects. So we had the AU Commission Summit with NEPAD recently in Dakar, and we are working very closely with AU out of NEPAD on this particular issue. Let's make sure that we are focusing on quality infrastructure, de-risking these projects, but developing quality projects that can be financed. Now, we should also focus on the issue of climate change. It's a big issue. We talked about it a bit tangentially, but this is going to be the biggest challenge that Africa faces. And we at the African Development Bank are doing our best with the African Adaptation Acceleration Program to mobilize $25 billion to support African countries to adapt to climate change, which is critical for us. And in closing, I just want to reemphasize what I said earlier. This is the time for us to work as a system to really optimize the global financial architecture. We need to optimize the balance sheets of the multilateral development banks. And Professor Jeffrey Sachs, thank you for the shout out for the African Development Bank. As I said, take the SDRs, for example. We can leverage those XDR by 3 to 4 times. And we are working very closely, Jeff, with Kristalina right now and our team with the Inter-American Development Bank on a model that we presented to them that they're looking at quite positively on how we can actually access these SDRs and then have this multiplicative effect to be able to deliver more for Africa. A $10 billion will become $30 to $40 billion. If a $20 billion can easily become $60 billion to $80 billion for Africa. So optimizing that global financial architecture is going to be very, very critical. IMF focusing on the global macroeconomic fiscal stability, us, the multilateral development banks, focusing on sectoral issues that many of you have talked about today. But also, our business model also needs to change. We clearly have a lot of resources that we need to accelerate our development. But we must therefore leverage the private sector. So when we talk about capital adequacy of the multilateral development banks, the critical issue is how you get risk capital, because it's the risk capital that you need to be able to leverage the private sector. So we should put attention to that. I am very pleased with the outcome of the Feed Africa Summit. In fact, Victor, as you were talking, I got new numbers coming in saying that we were able to mobilize $35.3 billion from so many partners from around the world in supporting Africa to fully unlock its agricultural potential. And I think, as Professor Rama said, if food accounts for almost 60% or 65% of consumer price index, so if we're able to feed ourselves, then we'll be able to drive inflation down significantly, because a lot of the inflation we have is actually structurally driven inflation. My last word is on industrialization. Professor Oyelaran said it. We must industrialize. The fastest way to poverty is the continued export of raw materials and commodities. But the highway to wealth is to industrialize. And so the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, as we talk about that throughout this summit, let's focus on making sure that the necessary infrastructure is there. The investment environment is good. Let's make sure that we are actually industrializing, having an industrial manufacturing zone that can create jobs, that have local and regional value chains that will make us more competitive in the global market. This is very, very critical. Let's create wealth for Africa. Let's grow faster. Let's grow better. Let's grow with more inclusivity, and let's be more competitive. As Jeffrey Carr said, Africa is going to be the center of the world, and we have all it takes to be what we said we want to be, the Africa we want.